This is Second Wind.
Today, we're talking to lead strategist at one of the hottest creative shops around quality meats. So I came across Joe on LinkedIn, where I spend an absurd amount of time. But Joe's been creating these really cool decks for LinkedIn. And not only are they very insightful, they are beautifully crafted and some of the most poignant takes on where the industry is at.
Here we go.
Joe Burns.
I'm not going to stay on very long. I'm at the tail end of pork chop induced pneumonia.
Pork is the worst pneumonia. Like, that's how COVID started, I think. I just had a really nice morning. My kids' class invited me to do an art class. So I spent an hour this morning making paper mache bowls with 4-year-olds, which is like the most creative thing I've done in years.
Your strategy lead, that's your title. You didn't want to be like a CSO or an XVP, CVP.
No, I hate that, man. I hate all that.
Agencies are really taking the piss with the titles, aren't they?
This is really leaves a bad taste in my mouth, especially as a strategist. I can kind of understand it if you're building an account management function and you're trying to like mirror the client organization.
Come on.
But like in strategy, and maybe this is just me trying to like bias things towards me and what I like, and you know.
It's about you. The podcast is about you.
Yeah, but like to me, the whole point is like you've got to, same with the creative department, I think you've got to be offering something that the clients don't have internally and feels different and distinctive. And I think if you use the kind of nomenclature that clients use, you're kind of like, you're moving away, you're moving closer to them, which I don't think is a good thing. You know, you're meant to, they're coming to you for something that they don't have, you know? Yeah,
like 72 has brand managers and brand directors instead of, account managers.
Oh, really?
Client service people. Yeah.
I mean, I will
Revolutionary. Really innovating the business, guys. Well done.
I mean, I do, one thing that I do, and maybe this is me being a bit silly, I don't like the language of client service. I don't like the idea that we are a service. I think that's just a step away from being like a vending machine for things. You know what I mean?
Or a vendor.
A vendor, yeah, exactly. So like, I think the idea of like saying we're a service maybe underplays us. I'd rather be like the cool people that you go to for good ideas and cool creative stuff to put out in the world. You know what I mean? Cultivate a bit more of them come to us because we've got something they want rather than we're there to service their needs. Anyway, but that's maybe me, again, being a bit biased.
I believe the most egregious abuse of title is the faux CMO. Who's, look, when you get into this debate, there's like a lot of nuance here because at some level, all CMOs are selling something, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a breed of CMOs that are selling to other CMOs and call themselves CMOs to be seen as peers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've had, I've been in sales in the agency world for like 20 years. So I've obviously, been through this process, but there's one story I always tell about Firstborn, which actually was downstairs from you, maybe in BBH.
Yeah.
You were in,
I was at BBH for a bit, yeah.
Over the Americas, 6th Ave somewhere. What was it?
Yeah, the Publicis Death Star.
Yeah, that was a beautiful building though, that one. But yeah, our chief creative officer, co-founder of the company, is a Korean guy called Jun Park. Very humble, and I remember coming to America and like, it's a sort of chest beating culture, right? Compared to Australia where like, if you're, the tall exactly. So like, we don't like people to be too confident in Australia or try new things. But we were on this call with a client and we were kind of going around this circle and everyone was introducing themselves. And June, who's the founder of the company and like, CCO or whatever, some big title, he just says, I'm June, I'm on the creative team.
Yeah, I like that. I
was just like, it really resonated with me because he wasn't elevating himself to some, pedestal. He was just saying, I'm part of the creative team.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot more respect for that. But again, you can tell from my accent, I'm British. I think a lot of the ways that competence and talent and seniority are signaled outside of the US just don't work here. Like in the UK, being able to maintain calm and a sense of chill, regardless of what madness and swirl is going on around you, that's seen as like leadership quality. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I think here it's maybe a little bit more perceived as like, why aren't you panicking? You should be panicking. Do you know what I mean? Like, we need more panic. We need panic to grease the wheels of the machine. Or like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? And
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like, oh man, this is just a good anecdote. We're doing a podcast, so I can throw this in there. Not yesterday. On Saturday, I was getting the subway into town, and like, you know, I've lived in New York for like 4 years now. This has never happened to me. I just assume this is a quintessentially American experience. A guy in the subway cop pulls out a gun, right? And like
A subway cop,
no, not a cop,
just a random person.
a random lunatic. Yeah. Everyone's like, someone screams, "Get down on the floor," and we're all cowering down on the carriage floor, right? I'm going to this event in town, this Clean Creatives event. Kind of crazy. We pull the emergency brake at the next stop. We all sprint up the subway train. I run out a couple of blocks and run down to Spring Street from like Broadway, Lafayette. And then I'm like calling my wife. I'm like, "Oh God, babe, a guy on the subway just pulled out a gun." And she's like, "Oh, you're going to come home?" I'm like, "No, I'm just going to go to this event." Do you know what I mean? But I think like we were chatting after the thing and she was like, the fact that you're not panicked about this bothers me a little bit. And I think there's a little bit of that element where it's like, I found it difficult to adjust to a culture here where you've kind of got to emote onto things to give them, do you know what I mean? Like impact and meaning. Because I was just a bit like, yeah, I kind of, you
Get
know,
on with it. I'm fine.
yeah, I'm fine. It was a bit crazy. I'm a bit buzzed up. I've got a bit of adrenaline. But like, isn't that just part and parcel of like the American experience? Like,
Yeah. Or life.
anyway, but yeah, like that kind of like, I think that kind of thing is something that I've struggled with maybe a little bit moving here. Not the guns.
Now, your headphones, they're very Brooklyn because I had a pair of those when I was living in East Village and I actually met the family.
Oh,
but
really?
I've forgotten the name.
The Grados.
Grados. Yeah, the son, Jonathan Grado, I think his name is.
Yeah,
I thought we were going to get some business from them, but they didn't have
it. Sounds like it's just a guy in his shed.
it. It is, yeah. It is.
But
It's
like,
a family. Yeah.
These were a gift from a mate of mine, actually, a guy who I used to manage when I was back in the UK at Mother. And he was like, "Look, I know you like high fidelity music. I'm going to get you these things." So he got me these for my birthday. So I'm very appreciative. Thank you, Marcus.
You call yourself a planner or a strategist?
Either works for me.
Okay.
Either.
No one knows what a planner is anymore, though. Right.
No, that's fallen off.
Old agency people like us. Joe, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
How was that intro? Was that all right?
Yeah, pretty good. I like the flam thing you did beforehand. I don't know if that was
Probably
edit
that out.
Yeah, like an alpha move to intimidate before. I'm just
That's exactly what it was.
just going to intimidate.
That's why
you.
I have the big mic so I can talk louder than anybody else.
Yes, superb. Yeah. I'm Joe, originally from the UK, moved over to the US in the middle of the pandemic, actually.
Nice.
Started off my career in media, of all places. Eventually found my way into Mother, was their kind of comms strategy guy there, did a lot of brand planning there, then moved over to the States, moved to Mother New York for a while, then to BBH, was head of strategy there for a bit. And now I'm at Quality Meats. Like, we're quite a cool, distinctive little agency. You know, our whole shtick is that we do all the stuff that big agencies can do without the big agency shenanigans. And like, you look at our output, you know, we put out a Super Bowl ad this year with GoDaddy. And like, you looked at the amount of stuff and the kind of clients we've got right now, you'd be stunned to learn how few of us there are putting all of this work out into the world. And I think, like, you know, there's a lot of stuff we talk about when it comes to how we work, but I think the thing that unifies everyone in the agency is we're all really entrepreneurial hustlers. You know, that's really, I think, the DNA that we all share as individuals is like all of us just like making shit and doing stuff and like finding ways to get it out there and make it happen. And, you know, I've worked in advertising for about 20 years. Making stuff should be the fun bit. It's the most enjoyable bit. And it's the bit that kind of matters the most, if you're honest. But it feels like so much of your time is spent in swirly meetings, going around the houses, discussing stuff that doesn't really matter. You know, someone with a ludicrous title from some holding company office gets dropped into a meeting with no context and ruins it. You know what I mean? It's like all the stresses and problems, they're never to do with making stuff. And like, they're never to do with coming up with good ideas. The stresses and the problems are always a result of just like bureaucracy and swirl and, you know, egos and politics and those kind of things. So Quality Meats was set up by two guys who were at the time were based in Chicago. We're a totally remote agency with the idea of just getting rid of that. It's like it's a beautifully simple idea. Get rid of the bad stuff and focus on the good stuff. The vibes are good. We've got great momentum, and we are doing things differently, and it's working.
That's the new word for culture, vibes. I like that. And I think it's more apt as a term to describe the feeling of working at an agency and the experience, right?
Yeah, totally, man. And like, it's really important. You know, there was a lot of talk when it was the whole RTO thing was, like I said, we're remote, but like with the whole, it's all about culture and that kind of thing. And I don't think you can just force that. It's just like, there's a way that agencies have that sense of momentum and velocity, you know, and like when you've got it, you feel it and you feel like you're part of it.
Now tell me about the decision to join a small entrepreneurial agency after, you know, Mother and BBH, obviously. I mean, BBH is sort of one of the greatest agencies of all time, I would argue. Mother's a sort of a little bit newer, but still a very hot sort of creative boutique agency. Both, I guess, are a little bit more mature in terms of their life stage. And, you know, I think at least I understand the magic of holding companies. You know, I was a firstborn for 4 years, right at the start of the acquisition for Dentsu, and then it sort of eventually just disappeared as a company. But I think there's a certain size and ownership structure that allows creative companies and creative agencies to really flourish.
Yeah, I think it's just the excitement of having more of a steer on things, to be honest with you. Like you said, Mother, I had such fantastic, I couldn't have asked for a better like decade in my career working at Mother in London and then coming to New York. And like, I really have so much respect for how they work as a company. And someone said to me, like, the best idea that ever came out of Mother was Mother. And I think like there's some amazing creative campaigns, but like truly it is.
They just did a titty bar, which was pretty funny.
Indeed they did. And especially the London office, it's like, it's the least siloed and most flat company I think I've ever experienced working at. You know what I mean?
They come from creative leadership, so creative being the ultimate sort of leaders.
I think in a way, but also the thing that Mother did, which also I think is maybe more prevalent in the UK than it is here in the US. I think like creativity is a bit more of a conceptual thing to Mother. So Mother always used to say in their creds meet, like the creds chem deck kind of thing, like we want to be the destination for creative people. We don't mean a department. We don't mean art directors and copywriters. We mean creative people. And they might be the strategists.
Everybody's a creative.
Yeah. The clients, we want the most creative clients in the world. We want them all to come to us. And like that was the Mother ethos, which I think, yes, the founders were creatives, but like that really shaped the place. So yeah, I had a really good education there, good decade. And then I think coming to the US, it was a bit of a culture shock thing of just how different the
but they love British planners.
They
British
do.
strategists. Suddenly you went from being just like everybody else to being, wow, this guy's so smart. Just listen to the way he talks.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of the accent does help. But I think the other thing is it's just planning. Strategy just plays a much more upstream and impactful role in a UK ad agency. You know, I think I had a big culture shock when I moved to the US and like I wasn't in creative reviews all of a sudden. I'm like, what the heck is my job then if I'm not sitting in the creative?
Do 3 slides at the end that set up the creative idea, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like, I think if you come here as a British planner, you've got 2 options. Either you can just coast on the accent and kind of waffle and write those 3 slides, or you can kind of get your elbows out a little bit and like fight for a seat at the table and a voice in the room.
And is that an issue with the briefing process, do you think? Or is that an issue of the creative process not appreciating or even having the luxury of like strategy?
Let's go to answer that question, mate. Let's decide how advertising works. Let's just decide how it works. Because my opinion of how advertising works is it does 3 things. First of all, it gives consumers an alternative to having to think, right? Our brains are the laziest thing ever, and thinking's really difficult. So if you can give the brain an alternative to having to think about something, that's a good thing for the brain.
That's the brand I believe in. That's the brand that represents my beliefs and I associate with, so I'm going to buy that one every time.
Exactly.
I'm a Patagonia buyer every time.
Yeah, exactly. So you give it an alternative to thinking about specs and tech specs and all that kind of stuff. You just give the brain an alternative to having to think about something, a decision. The second thing that advertising needs to do It's because the brain isn't just lazy, it's also really suspicious. And it doesn't like being told what to do. So you have to trick the brain into thinking it's an idea that it already kind of thought. And that's an insight, right? It's like, so you have to give the brain an alternative to thinking and then trick it with an insight into thinking that it had that idea itself or it already thought that kind of thing. But then the third thing that advertising has to do is get past the fact that the brain likes to just not pay attention to anything because it's got better things to be doing. And you have to grab people's attention in order to do those other two things. So advertising, in my opinion, my idiosyncratic opinion is it needs to get past the spam filter and not be ignored. Then it needs to make the brain think that like it's the one that had this idea. And then it needs to give the brain an alternative to thinking about the thing that you want to do. Now,
So you start with the logo, right? You start with the logo.
and the difference, I think, in the culture in the UK versus New York or the US in general is in the UK, I think those three things are treated with equal importance. You know what I mean? Like, what is it we're trying to say? How do we get people to believe it? And then how do we get them to pay attention to what we're saying so that they take in that information? The industry here in the US is massively weighted to just how do we get people to pay attention? And it's almost treated like, which is much more in the remit of creative. Like, there's no question there. Like, the job of creative fundamentally is break through people's crappy, distracted attention, get through the spam filter. Strategy's remit is the bit which is a bit more like, what's the alternative to thinking that we're putting in people's heads? Do you get what I mean? Like, what is it we're trying to say that's going to do the thing that we want it to do? And I don't think that muscle memory is as developed here in the US. So you come to the US and like a lot more of the discourse and the conversation is around like earned media and shares and cut through and that kind of thing and awareness. And like, that's much more in the realm of a creative challenge. So your role as a planner, you're a bit like, why is no one paying attention to this thing over here? And you kind of have to fight a little bit more to, and the thing I would say is not every brand needs to think about what they're trying to say. Some people just need to say the brand name in a really clever way that people remember because it's a low involvement category and they're Coca-Cola and like red logo, happiness is probably put some enough TV budget behind that every week and you're kind of fine to tick along. But other brands maybe do need to think a little bit more about them.
It depends, I guess, is the answer, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And like, you know, we chatted a little bit about title dilution and like, I think perhaps we have diluted strategy. I think strategy should be a little bit more the team you bring in when you're trying to do something that's not just raise awareness or, you know, something very simple, like simple, direct response stuff. You should probably only need a strategist on something where it's like, okay, we're completely changing how people perceive this brand.
Big
or we're
meaty
launching
challenge, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You need that thinking. You don't need to think it if it's just like, we need to maintain awareness with 5% less share of voice. Do you know what I mean? I can't really help you there.
I always found it like a bit awkward when we would try to bring strategists into the digital space, you know, and we were trying to shoehorn them into this process. And it was kind of like, they never really, I've seen a lot of strategists come into like digital shops, and this was like 10 years ago. And they were always a bit of a fish out of water, you know, because it was sort of like they wanted to do these big, meaty, juicy sort of transformation narrative messaging projects. And they were given like 3 days to, you know, like do some research around the website or the banner campaign or like whatever the digital assignment was.
Sure.
How did you get into the industry? I'm curious.
Oh man, my journey was really weird. I came down from Derby in the Midlands, not really knowing what I wanted to do, and just interviewed at anything that sounded interesting. And I was actually like a copywriting placement at a digital agency, first and foremost. This was just on the cusp of the 2008 crash. So like that agency that I was a placement at went bust. But the owner of it also ran this kind of fashion. We were kind of like PR plus wholesale plus an online e-com thing, right?
So you went to uni in the UK, went down to London, got a job as a copywriter at a digital agency. Well, probably writing copy for websites or something.
Yeah. A lot of like local healthcare website copy. You know what I mean? That
Pretty
kind
dry.
of thing. Really dry. And we did have some cool stuff. And like there was like renaming projects for a digital sound company or whatever. But like it wasn't big brand advertising type stuff. But then when that
You
went
didn't go straight to Mother and just say, everybody, I'm here.
No, I didn't even go from the digital agency to the fashion agency to Mother. There's another beat. So I did this fashion thing, but I really hated the culture of the fashion industry. like hated it. It's like The Devil Wears Prada is pretty fucking accurate for how those people like waltz around. And like their money was terrible. Only people with rich parents can do that job. And like I eventually, a friend of mine, and I was stopping on different friends' sofas. She said to me like, "Hey, we've got a grad scheme at this media agency I work at. Do you want to come and work there?" So I did, applied, and then they hired me. I think maybe because the guy who was my manager, a guy called John, who I think is now like MD of one of the UK media agencies, but he's also from the Midlands. And I think he just liked another Midlands guy being there. So they hired me. And like the funny thing is, basically, unless this blew my mind, even as a fresh-faced grad, everyone else was printing off media plans and then hand typing and using calculators to input information into spreadsheets and reports.
This was 2008?
This was 2008. I was just like, this is fucking nuts. I can automate this. I just built a big Excel macro and kind of taught myself a little bit of basic VBA stuff and macros. I was like, this could be automated. Did that. And I basically took like my job down from like what a report I had to do every 2 weeks, then took me an afternoon. I just pushed a button and it did it. And rather than tell my manager, I went to the comms strategy team because they were the most interesting people in the pub and was like, "Hey, I've just got loads of time now because I've automated my job. Can I help? Can you take me under your wing?"
This is pre-AI automation.
Yeah, so they did. And then I was on that team for a couple of years. And I remember when I got hired by Mother because we had this client, HTC, which was a Chinese mobile OEM type thing.
Phones.
And Mother came on. They put the creative business up for pitch, and Mother came on. Like,
an OEM, just for those who aren't aware, original equipment manufacturer, I believe.
Yeah, something. It's like, you know,
people who make the product, the hard goods.
It's basically like when, I don't know if I'm legally allowed to say these things, but like it's basically like in China when branded stuff isn't being made on the assembly line, the assembly line gets to make unbranded stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like the same assembly line,
cheaper,
but
more efficient.
Yeah,
they fit it in.
Okay. These guys grew into a proper brand. I'm not saying that was them for any legal purposes listening to this call.
These are my personal opinions. Don't worry.
But anyway, so Mother came on as their lead creative agency. And Mother obviously had done an amazing job of the TV work, brilliant brand idea, but they really struggled with the digital. And I was in this meeting and Mother were getting grilled by the client. I was just like, you know, piped up like, "Oh, what if we did this thing?" And I basically said, "What if we," which now seems like so parochial, but at the time was probably kind of like, "Whoa, that's pretty groundbreaking." I was like, "What if we took all of the reviews that we've got in our insights team and all of the shots that you've done for the outdoor and then all of the targeting data we've got based on these things over here and put them into the dynamic creative optimizer and then just serve people combinations of those to do the things that we want to do."
Brands still aren't doing that now. So you're a long way ahead. Yeah,
but anyway, but the strat on the account, a guy called James Broomfield, is now like a BBH in London, and he was once world Monopoly champion as well. Nice bit of trivia about him.
That's an unusual flex.
Yes. He's a very intelligent man, actually. One of the smartest people I think I've ever encountered, let him work with. And he was like,
you may want to go for something slightly more aspirational than Monopoly. But
I think he was like 12 when he did it as well.
Wow. So okay. That's pretty cool. It changes it.
He's a smart guy is what I'm saying. And like, he was like, "Dude, that was amazing. You saved our butts. Send me your CV." And then 6 months later, I got pulled into Mother and sat in the reception.
So you were in that meeting with a different agency.
Yeah.
You got poached from a meeting performance.
Yeah, exactly.
And had you planned that idea or you just came up with it?
No. I never do anything like that. I'm always just a pretty shoot from the hip guy. And like, then Mother brought me in, and the whole point of Mother bringing me in was because they wanted more comms thinking. And like, you know, Mother's independent, so they can invest in stuff ahead of the needs.
Comms meaning like PR when you say comms? Just
like communication strategy, just like, you know, the stuff that Naked used to do, where it's just like, why make a TV ad and some banners when we could make a reality TV show or a music video and then do things in a different way? So it's just like the shape of ideas was what they wanted to really play around with.
Which they probably call partnerships now, right? Or
yeah,
maybe content or something.
I mean, they brought me in to do the thinking that would help them sell those ideas in, basically, and like help develop those kind of ideas and really shape the kind of creativity that they could put out into the world. So yeah, I did that for a long time, and then I was head of comm strategy there in London, and then came to the US. So like, I'm a bit of a hybrid. I've done brand strategy, digital strategy, and comm strategy. I've done all the different forms of strategy, really.
The grad program's sort of your entry point there, isn't it?
Yeah, in a media agency of all places.
Do you guys have a grad program at Quality Mates?
No, we don't. I think part of this is because we're fully remote, so it's hard to provide the like pastoral stewardship that you need. Maybe it's something in the future that we'd look at doing, but like, we're pretty senior as a company, and I think that's something. I know we want to get into the meat of the discussion about what people looking to break into the industry can do, but like, yeah, I think a lot of there's a gap in the market, I think, for providing that stewardship to young people, because I think agencies are just going to shrink,
Yeah.
I think they are going to shrink. Like, the reason that you're going to get pulled into an agency isn't the way I did through a grad scheme. It's probably going to be because you've got a Substack with 20,000 followers that speaks all about surf locations, and there's a brief on surfers for Vans or something, and like, oh, we'll get this person who's got this Substack, and we know they do brand strategy and journalism, and they're a photographer. You get what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's part of what I'm doing. This is probably a good segue into
Excellent
the
segue.
question.
You know, we sit at kind of an intersection of agencies and production companies and brands. And so we know a lot of freelancers. Our business model comes from the really old days of like director reps for commercials and carrying around reels to agencies. And so I think when I saw this, I was like, you really articulated what I've been seeing. And I don't think anyone's like done that so elegantly and so beautifully.
So yeah, that was one of the inputs, just like understanding and trying to articulate this idea that like, you can't just get by doing what you're told anymore, because there's a big machine that's going to do it better and cheaper and never needs to sleep. And yeah, it might hallucinate and give people six fingers now and again, but like, those problems will be ironed out. So that's one side of it. The second part of this is that I don't think as an industry, we're going to be immune from the shifts towards influencers and creators. And that's one of the reasons like I've got over the cringe of posting on LinkedIn and post up there. Is like, if you look at what's happening in how consumers engage with media, and like the amount of time people spent with influencer, creator, talent oriented juice content, I think that's going to come to our industry as well, marketing, advertising. And I think it's going to go beyond that. I think like Wisconsin dairy farmers are probably going to be watching videos of Hank, the dairy supply co's stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I just think that we're entering a world where influence or creation or whatever you want to call it, we haven't got the language for it yet, I don't think influence is necessarily the right thing, but like this idea that personality, I don't mean that like a kind of performative thing, but just like people are important, and like people having ideas and being able to share them out there, that actually becomes way more important than a job title or your position in a matrix or any of that stuff. It's like, oh, this person made this report. Remember when that did the rounds and everyone saw that? Yeah, that's the guy who did that. Or this is the woman whose Substack was the one which wrote that essay on blah, blah, blah. I think that starts to become much more potent currency in terms of your job in this industry. Because I genuinely do think that like clients really want the stuff that ad agencies give them. I think they're becoming a little bit skeptical about an ad agency being the delivery format for that kind of stuff, and like agencies are the things that need to adapt to this change more so than I think talent does, if I'm honest with you. Because, I don't think some clients do. Some clients want to know that there is a floor of a building in Manhattan with 200 people sitting at desks.
And they're all drinking Pepsi water, not Coke water.
Yes. Some people do want that. And I think that those kind of legacy
holding
ways
companies will serve those organizations.
That'll continue. But like, I genuinely think this thing with, is a name Bozoma St. James and the Therabody, I think that is a watershed. Because like, this is someone who is a former CMO, now an influencer, brokering a relationship with themselves, Therabody, Jimmy Fallon to produce branded content, right? So that's just something where an advertising agency would be traditionally the people who broker and do the intermediary there, and they've just been cut out completely. So like that to me is like, okay, now things are changing because big accounts are being organized around talent in this way. And I don't think that's something, it's really naive, I think, to think like that's something that only matters really high up or really consumer focused stuff. I think like I said, Hank Dairy Supply Co. in Wisconsin is going to be there in 10 years. My brother back in the UK, he's got a business. He sells, they call it car detailing, but it's basically shampoo for cars, right? Clean your car when you drive. He makes content and produces that. And that gives his business a competitive advantage against other car detailing shampoo supply companies or whatever. So I do think like we can't afford as an industry to sleep on this shift. We need to have our hats in the ring a little bit. Otherwise, just like what happened with search, right? Search and digital advertising. I'm not quite old enough to have lived through digital. I'm old enough to have lived through mobile, and I'm old enough to have lived through social in the ad industry. Like we failed as an industry to like recognize the size and scale of those shifts. And like what happened is the creative agencies basically said, oh, that's the geek shit. Leave that to the geeks.
We're making films.
Yeah, we're making films. Leave the social to the geeks. But that's a hugely important part of the marketing mix that we basically said, oh, I'll deal with it. And now we're in a position 10, 15 years later where creative agencies are emailed media plans from the media agency with 600 formats on. No idea how to do it. And like, whose fault is that? It's the creative agency's fault for not understanding that this thing was going to be here 10 years ago. And like, I just think we can't afford to have another one of those as an industry, like we did with social and like we did with mobile and like we did with digital. We need to be ahead of the curve and not scared of it. And that goes for both AI and influence, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, really, it's about consumer behaviors and attention, right? Like we're a consumer. Is that a Juicy Juice?
It's my kids.
I learned about Juicy Juice yesterday. That's an iconic American thing. I had no idea what a Juicy Juice was until yesterday at 3 p.m. on my call.
I don't. This may well be a Juicy Juice, but
it's
maybe
just we had Just
Foods.
Juice in Australia. What was a juice in the Midlands?
Ribena, which is a brand.
Ribena. Yeah, I know Ribena. Okay, so yeah, and look, I think the hangover from iPhone disruption is persistent because I look around today and I see, oh, we're a social agency, we're a creative agency, we're a performance agency, and there's all these specialties and silos. But realistically, we're seeking to get consumers' attention, right? And we're looking to be present in the places that they are. And obviously, the feeds is a totally different ball game than a commercial, buy on television, which is typically like live sports. It's sort of just become live sports, right?
Yeah.
And so the equation there is very different. Like, on social, you probably have, I think it's like 1.6 seconds in the feed or something before you get swiped. So, I mean, how do you guys think about building brands in that environment? Like, are you a creative agency that mostly does films and campaigns? You mentioned a Super Bowl spot. Or are you guys truly trying to be like agnostic to channels and sort of lead brands across the plethora?
Yeah, I think our approach is to try and always start with an insight and then to articulate that let's be honest, it's a deck, right? A way of articulating that idea, getting across the tone, making sure everyone understands it. And then you get to an end line or a platform idea or whatever you want it to be. And then you look at how you translate it to different channels, So like we do a lot of TV work. So we did Super Bowl spot recently, and that often leans on humor to bring that idea to life in a smart way. But we also do a lot of like stunts, activations, PR driving and creative ideas, and then building the right ecosystem around those things to make sure that it does have the reach and the scale to reach enough people. And I think like that for us is a pretty smart model. I think we're good at thinking in that way. We're not an agency who you'd probably come to and be like, let's do some direct response banner churn. I think it takes a different skill set creatively. I think strategists can usually straddle those two things. I think creatives kind of oriented towards one thing or another most of the time. You know what I mean? Like it's just a different.
Yeah, the weird thing about social and performance, and you said direct response, which was back in the day, like, mailers mainly, right? But it was sometimes print ads as well, but it was like, it was designed to elicit a direct response. That was sort of the genesis of that. But what I'm seeing is a merging of banners and social, right? Because most banners now are on social. And because those platforms like Meta have become so self-serve and so intelligent and so easy to use, there's this really weird mix of like performance agencies focusing on social, but then also on a platform like TikTok, you tend to see a bit more of that like creativity and the kind of content creation and more of those like creative agency duties being tapped, right?
Yeah.
So it's more about like, how can we tell stories and stand out and be interesting in this new platform? Whereas like social has kind of become a game of like, how much juice can we squeeze from this segment?
Yeah, and I think we're living in a hangover from that distinction making much sense, Like the idea of brand versus performance advertising. It's a useful rule of thumb, heuristic for a layperson to maybe understand like what's going on. Like, okay, brand is all about mental real estate. It's about what goes on in people's heads, the thing they remember. Performance is about, like you say, a direct response, getting someone to do something right then and there. So like, you have to measure those things in different ways. And there's probably different media channels and different styles of idea that are going to affect those things differently. But like the fact that we've built a whole industry around two different measurement approaches is kind of insane, isn't it? It's like, there's this stuff we measure in this way, clicks, immediate response. And there's this stuff which we measure in this way, surveys. Let's completely separate those two things out and just treat them like they're totally different, And
let's also not tie them directly to like sales data, right? Let's have like a good
exactly.
step. So attribution is impossible.
Yeah, and I worked in a media agency a bit. Like I said, we actually worked on a lot of econometrics models, a lot of like, I think they usually call it media mix modeling these days because they like the acronym.
Sure,
MMM.
sounds sophisticated. Sounds very smart.
Triple M.
We're using media mix modeling.
Yeah,
2.0.
But that stuff, like once you start to pull everything apart, then you see that brand does contribute to like response, and we're working for a client at the minute. Definitely can't say the name because it's, it's a client.
That's fine.
But like, we're working for a client for a minute and we've just launched a load of brand work for them and their ROAS numbers have just shot down, So like we're doing brand advertising.
Return on ad spend, right? ROAS.
Yeah.
It's probably my least favorite acronym because
it says arse in it.
Yeah.
Not what you want. But yeah, so like basically the more long-term brand building work you do, the more effective your short-term efficient performance marketing becomes. You know what I mean? So like the distinction is helpful rule of thumb for a layperson to, if I'm talking to my brother who sells shampoo for cars, then yes, I think telling him no in that way is helpful. I think for us as professionals within the industry, we should be maybe a little bit more sophisticated about the relationship.
I bet he loves how you talk about his work. Yeah, so anyway, let's bring it back to this deck. I think what I'm hearing is a pretty consistent narrative that I've been mulling around as I think about my own children going through school, which feels like it was set up more to, follow instructions versus like exploring what makes you unique and what's your niche and how do you, put things into the world. And so it sort of leads me to think like everyone's going to be an influencer in a way, or creator, whatever we want to call it, because influencers, like no one likes the sound of that. But I think it's about figuring out what's your niche, who's your audience, what's your community. What would you say to young people, right, who, you got into this business in a very roundabout way. I sort of had a little bit more. I wanted to be a chef, so I went to school to be a chef, and then decided that the hours were bad and advertising was better. I think I think for a young person who has a degree, maybe that they didn't like or whatever. Like, what would your advice be to young people today, with this deck in context, right, and with some of these insights around the future of work, the industry, and this sort of violent transformation we're going through?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd give as a piece of advice is, and just because it's easy to rattle off quickly, is slick, polished presentation is important. I don't mean that in like a traditional, like wear a suit and tie. I mean, if your website looks fucking great, if it looks cool, good. That is just a good thing, right? No one wants...
If you have a website.
If you have a website.
So get a website. I guess that would be first thing, right?
Yeah. Whatever it is, maybe you publish a magazine yourself. Maybe you've got a Substack. Maybe you've got a podcast. It doesn't matter what it is. presentation and vibes is really important.
Did you ever read about sorry to interrupt, did you ever read about the Apple marketing philosophy and the word they used, impute? This has always stayed with me.
No,
This idea.
I'm
So there were three core tenets to the Apple marketing philosophy, and one of them was impute, okay? And what they meant by that was humans judge a book by its cover. So if the packaging looks like shit, they're going to expect that the product is going to be shit. You need to impute the value of the product into the entire experience, from the bag it comes in to the, label, to the way the box opens. And I think it's such an interesting way to talk about it, because everybody knows that feeling when Apple's iPhone, the packaging was just like revolutionary. And the way they did retail was just revolutionary.
Apply Apple's impute to your stuff 100%. Like, that to me is just like such not an easy thing, but like, it's like advertising. Your biggest hurdle is ignorance. And I don't mean that because people are stupid. I mean, like, being ignored. Just start with that thing in your head. Number one thing is, you're more likely to be ignored than any other outcome when you're trying to get into an industry. So like, do everything you can to not be ignored, imbue everything with distinctiveness, and like, just like a slick, you know what I mean? Everything just should exude the feeling that you want it to do. And that'd be the first thing.
And
I think
for your deck that you created, because it's a really beautiful deck. I'm gonna it looks like it's AI generated, but there's a consistency in the visual aesthetic of it that makes it feel really like polished and beautiful. But I'm gonna guess it wasn't a team of like 6 designers that worked on that.
No, man, it's just me having a coffee in the morning every day of the week.
What's your stack behind that? Is it Midjourney and like some sort of Google Slides, or is it
Midjourney and Adobe Express or Canva?
Interesting.
I like Adobe more because you get more typeface. I'm obsessed with typography, so
Adobe's
Adobe's great.
A template, or are you?
The only thing that's consistent
You're quite
is
a good designer, I will say. Like, if you did that all yourself, you're quite a good designer.
Thank you. The only thing that's consistent is I always use the same body copy for everything. And then
like the typeface.
Yeah.
You've got a couple in there. You got a serif, you got a sans serif. I like that.
The serif one that I write like the body text in, I use the same one in everything I do.
Interesting.
Everything else
sort
changes.
of building this brand for yourself, right? And it's like the typeface is part of that.
Yeah, almost an anti-brand. A lot of the best practice. I didn't want to become a creator or anything. I just wanted to have a lot of autonomy and make stuff that I wanted to do and say stuff that I wanted to say. So like, it was never like, oh, I'm going to have this brand. I did try that for a little bit, but I was like, oh no, I'd rather just make each thing, to steal your phrase that you stole yourself from Apple, impute. I'd rather each thing that I release or drop or whatever, put out there, imputes what I want it to say. You know, I'm not a great believer in it. I'm very skeptical of human language being any better than anything else. I think like as a society and as a culture, we overvalue words as a means of communication and undervalue all the other stuff, movement, art, sound, music, you know? It's just so important for junior talent to like be distinctive in that way. And the other thing is just like be prolific and make stuff. And I think the ideal employee or the ideal thing to be these days is T-shaped. You know, there's a lot of writing around T-shaped employees, but like if you want to be the generalist strategist or creative, but that just has a huge depth in this specific thing. And that's what's going to get you a foot in the door. You know what I mean? If you're the strategist it could be anything. You could be the world's biggest expert on Zin
Monopoly
pouches.
champion.
Yeah, Monopoly champion. You could be, you know what I mean? It could be like, you could just be really interested in legal highs. And you could have a Substack which talks about legal highs from the point of view of a brand strategist or a creative. Or you could be really interested in the typography used by supermarket brands or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, turn that thing into something that you can put out there and get a Substack or make things like I do and put them on LinkedIn or start up a podcast and show that you've got that entrepreneurial mindset where you can take your thinking and package it up in a way that people want to engage with, you know?
It's like build an audience around your interests, right?
Yeah. And you'll meet interesting people as well. That's the other thing, you know, like we're doing projects and you do research on Gen Z and like the currency, I think, for younger people these days is being the person who sits at the connection points between other people. You know what I mean? Like everyone wants to be the person. It's like, well, I know this person who's a photographer, and I know this person who's over here who's a graphic designer, and I know this person who's got a band. So let's put together let's make the album art for that person there. You know what I mean? Like
it's like network arbitrage.
Exactly, network arbitrage. There's a presentation in that. But like if you can do that, that is not just a skill set that's going to set you apart amongst the people you're competing for with jobs. It's going to make you more valuable than 50% the people in an advertising agency right now. Do you know what I mean? Because like that ultimately is one of the rarest skill sets. Like you say, network arbitrage is a very rare skill set. And it's like, it's not something that I couldn't do that. You know what I mean? I'm one of the people who gets pulled into things. I'm not one of the people who can create those connection points. So lean into that, or either do what I'm doing and put stuff out there, or do the arbitrage thing and like make the connections, you know?
And you have young kids. What do you think your kids are going to be doing in 20 years as they enter start their careers?
Oh man, that's a great question. I honestly feel like the thing is changing so much, man. It's really, really difficult to say. To me, I think the most valuable skill set in the world that we're heading towards is being able to think about risk and probability. Like, that is it. If you can think in a highly probabilistic manner and understand edge and margin and like risk and the way that probabilities work, that it doesn't really matter how you apply it, whether you're working in an insurance firm or whether you're working in a music label or what, you know what I mean? But I think if you can understand like how risk sits across things and how probabilities work, that skill set's the one I'd encourage people to pursue. It feels uncreative, but I don't think it is, because it's like where you want to be is in like a VC firm backing the different making bets. Yeah.
And so you and I have a commonality in that we've worked at some pretty big established companies sort of early-ish in our career, learned the craft a little bit, and then gone on to like smaller, more entrepreneurial companies where we could have a bigger impact. Do you still think that like career arc will hold in the future?
I think it will depend on who the person is, you know, and like the more T-shaped you are, I think the more likely you are to work with a smaller or more entrepreneurial type thing. So you've got to be entrepreneurial. You've got to like learning by doing stuff. And I've always preferred to learn by doing. I know a lot of people, maybe because the education system is geared up towards that, prefer instructional, you know what I mean, didactic styles of learning. And like, I do think
Let me read this to you and listen quietly while I read to you about this subject.
I just find it very difficult to empathize with, you know what I mean? I can't see the world. I struggle to understand why people prefer being instructed how to do things. Like my brain I'm just not wired that way.
I can't do that. I need to try it myself. I cannot learn that way.
So I think that, I mean, there's always going to be roles for those kind of people, but I just think maybe the scales are being tipped in the other direction. If anything, I think actually we've had a good 50 years where that skill has been, do you know what I mean? Diligence and following instructions has probably been a little bit more valuable than it would have been historically beforehand. You know what I mean? Like, I think industrialization, I don't know why I'm comparing like jobs next year to jobs in the 1400s, but I am. But like, I think industrialization and the education system, like we've been chatting about, is a product of the industrial society that it was born in. And like, I think industrialization really kind of tipped the scales towards that more matrix, following instructions way of doing and thinking. And I think maybe we're just going to tip a bit away from that a little bit. More, in fact. I think even the digital revolution probably tipped us further away than, do you know what I mean? I think we've been on the journey as a species away from, you know, diligence and following the instructions. And I think that's just going to continue if you look at the way that things are going.
People are rewarded now for misbehaving in public. Okay, last question is, if you could have a legacy, what would that be?
This cracks me up, this one. I don't know. It's the fact that you said in 30 years' time when we were chatting earlier, I'm like, I don't want to be dead in 30 years. Yeah. I want to just be, do you know what I mean? I want to be that, there's an old guy who lives up on our block and he just kind of stands out there and like, hi kids, you know what I mean? And like, just stands there getting coffee from the bidet. I just want to be that guy.
Like an old Italian guy in the village having an espresso every hour or whatever.
I'd rather.
I didn't say Nespresso just then. I said an espresso, just to clarify.
Yeah, I'd rather be that guy than have a legacy, I think. But no, I don't know, man. I just want people to do good work. I
Yeah.
just want people to do good work that they enjoy. I'm not sure. I feel very embarrassed and uncomfortable with the idea of leaving a legacy.
Because you're not American.
Yeah, maybe. I'd love to make an album, man. It's a musical.
That's cool.
I'd love.
What do you play?
I play guitar, but I like writing the songs. I'm not a very good guitarist. I just like writing music.
Very cool. Well, I look forward to that product being posted on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. That could be my legacy. I'll just
There you go. You
make
have
an
a bucket
album.
list item.
Yeah, and disappear.
Cool. Joe Burns, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you giving us some time and some insight into how you're thinking about the industry and the future.
Awesome. Love chatting. Nice to meet you.
Cool. Thank you. Bye.